It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelli, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time. And I am joined, as always, by my new recruit co-host.
Yeah, this is the Bekinney. Say, Jelli, are you sure we're heading in the right direction?
The scouter picked up a reading of 6,500 over this way, definitely.
Over 6,000? That's not half bad.
Not half great either, considering where our power level is, but the minimum consideration for the Frieza Force is only 1,200, and anyone over 5,000 gets strong consideration. Whoever it was could at least be a peacekeeper on the low-level planet.
Hey, nobody on my planet aside from me has ever topped 5,000.
Yeah, and why do you think Lord Frieza didn't even bother to keep an infantry there to keep your people in line? You pose no threat.
I think we might pose some threat if you knew.
If we knew what? About your legendary bathroom breaks? No, shut up and keep your eyes peeled.
Shut up. You were the one that started this podcast while we're supposed to be looking for a warrior. I'm just trying to do the thing. You know, the banter thing.
Fair point, recruit. Yes, listeners, we're here on planet Orthoptera as our long-range scouters picked up a blip, and then upon landing, our personal devices got us a bearing to follow.
Though all we've seen so far has been a lot of foliage and a few insects. It's a marshy surface here. We're slopping through muck and mud and wading through shallow pools looking for this warrior.
Hey, I'm usually the one that describes the planet's topology.
Usually? We've been on one other planet.
And I describe the terrain. Listen, you keep your eyes peeled. With a power level like this around, it makes sense that larger animals would probably steer clear of the area. Our fighter is probably nearby. Any read on the scouter?
No, but didn't you say some fighters can suppress their power?
Suppress or only harness when they transform, yeah.
Oh yeah, hey, speaking of transformations, does it count if...
Shh! Do you hear that?
Why did you start a podcast requiring us to speak if you keep telling me to be quiet?
Would you just listen for 1 second?
Okay, yeah, I definitely heard that. It came from behind that thicket over there. Now I'm picking something up.
Obviously, I am too. It's right where those noises, to our 2 o'clock. Hello? Can anybody hear me over there?
Readings at 7,200 now and holding.
Okay, follow me. Hello? Hey, we're with the Frieza Force. Not sure if you've heard of it, but,
I can see the warrior. They look a lot bigger than either of us. Light pink skin, long, flowing, bright red hair, muscles upon muscles. This guy is bigger than the two of us put together.
You know size matters very little. Be ready to translate for me if needed. Hello, hey, listen, warrior, my name is Jelli. I'm an elite recruiter working with Lord Frieza to gather fighters who can...
What the hell is that?
Don't just stand there, run!
Where? They're everywhere!
Listeners, that commotion must have attracted what appear to be giant insects.
Oh, my roots, they bit off his head! They bit off his head, man!
Damn it, just run! Quick, in there! That cave there, dive in! I'll blast the opening behind us when we're in!
Are we safe?
Assuming there's nothing worse than giant crickets who bite off heads inside this cave, yes, we're safe. For our listeners out there, as I just alluded to, we were attacked by gigantic crickets, for lack of a better word. They immediately decapitated the warrior who was out there for who knows what reason, but in any event, it means whatever these creatures are, they're strong, though clearly antagonistic. Now we've dived into a cave that have caused a cave-in at the entrance to block those things from getting in here.
What the hell, man? What the hell? You never said anything about giant crickets.
It's a big galaxy. Not every planet is well charted. Besides, it could be worse.
How could it possibly be worse?
We could have a Saiyan on the rampage in his Great Ape form outside. And speaking of which...
Oh, please don't do it.
Oh, I'm doing it. Let's take a minute to catch our breath and discuss this week's topic. And to help us discuss this week's topic, because we're going to be delving into a giant creature, we're gonna reach out on our scouters. We're gonna dial someone up. We're gonna call one of our friends. This is going to be our friend Matt. Matt is with the Kaiju Transmissions podcast. He has been doing that for a few years with his co-host Bird, and they discuss all things Japanese giant monster fantasy fiction, that kind of stuff. Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman. We've talked about those few things a little bit here on this show already, and so we're gonna call Matt. We're gonna dial him in, and he's gonna help us break down this week's topic of discussion. Let me call him up. So, Matt, thank you for joining us.
Super stoked to be on, actually. And, you've been on our show a ton, so I'm glad to be able to come on tonight.
Yes, under an alias. I have been on their show. So if you're a common listener to both shows, you have heard me on the Kaiju Transmissions podcast before. But this is Final Forum. This is our Dragon Ball podcast, but like I said, we're going to be discussing a giant creature this time, and I'm going to spin it back over to Bekinney to recap the episode and get us kicked off on this topic of discussion for the day.
All right, so I drew the good straw this week because there's not a whole lot to recap. Where we left off, our heroes were stuck in what we dubbed the solar oven, waiting for daybreak and their inevitable demise. During the course of the episode, full moon, Goku mentions that during full moons, there's a giant ape monster that shows up and destroys things and, in fact, killed his grandfather. At which point, people start piecing together, based on his story, that he might be the one responsible for the destruction. And they warn Goku not to look at the moon. And, of course, what happens anytime you tell anybody not to do something, they immediately do it. And it's sort of played off as a gag at first as he looks at the moon and then looks back at his friends and nothing really seems to happen. There's almost like a little bit of relief that washes over them, only to immediately be cut short as he turns into the Oozaru, the giant ape monster. So this has the positive side effect of busting everybody out of the solar oven that they've been stuck in. But unfortunately, it causes a rampage, and the Oozaru starts to essentially lay waste to Pilaf's castle. Goes back and forth for a bit with Pilaf defending his castle, our heroes trying to get away from the Oozaru to save their own lives. They eventually come up with a plan on the fly to cut off the Oozaru's tail, which immediately reverts Goku back to his normal state. Afterwards, he's passed out for a while. Everybody takes solace in the fact that their troubles are now over. And then our heroes decide to part ways, with most of the group heading off towards, they just call it the city. I don't think an actual name for the city is ever given. But they, I guess, plan on, I don't know, getting an apartment together or something. And Goku decides to fly off to go train with Master Roshi. And that's pretty much where the episode ends. Tying this back into Journey to the West, as we have been for the past few episodes, Sun Wukong has the ability to become as tall as heaven, which is a transformation ability that is basically synonymous with the character itself. The appearance of the Oozaru harkens back to Sun Wukong's appearance and Toriyama's initial Goku design, which was a lot more monkey themed than Goku actually is. Toriyama also bases the idea to an extent on King Kong, because Kong is incredibly popular in Japan.
Right. Talking about that, the King Kong part of it, the original Kong was a smash hit in Japan, and the re-release of that original in the 1950s is a key factor in the creation and success of the Godzilla franchise. That movie comes out, producers see it and see how much money it makes, and the team that made Godzilla, gets the go-ahead to make a giant monster movie from Toho. So Kong begets Godzilla. Kong even crosses over with Godzilla in King Kong vs. Godzilla, which to this day remains the most highly attended Godzilla film in Japan. It also created a lot of the conventions of the genre itself, in terms of usually, you kind of introduce the two monsters kind of separately. They have their first fight. They go off with somewhat of a draw, or maybe one of them having an upper hand, and then they have another little mini adventure each on their own, and then they come back for a final conflict at the end. That's a big kind of convention and trope and structure of the genre, and that's created in this movie, King Kong versus Godzilla. And the two would cross paths again in 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong, which is one of 2021's highest grossing films. There's even a lot of claims. As I was doing a lot of my research, I came across this being repeated over and over and over. As I was either reading books or clicking through some links or watching some YouTube videos, I came across a lot of claims that Kong was actually Japan's very first kaiju. And one of the reasons I brought Matt in was to talk a little bit more about that, because it's not maybe as entirely true as a lot of those claims say.
Yeah, I mean, there's two films that lead most people to claim that Kong was Japan's first kaiju. The first is 1933's King Kong, made in Japan, and then you have 1938's King Kong appears in Edo. And the first, King Kong, made in Japan, is actually not at all a traditional kaiju film in the way that we think of it. The movie's plot's actually about a struggling and homeless man who is in love with a woman, but he can't be with her due to his lack of livelihood. And so he creates this vaudeville show, and he basically wears his Kong suit, and he destroys miniatures to try to make money and then to be able to marry his love. This was actually a short film made by the studio Shochiku, and that was actually the same company that dubbed the original American 1933 Kong film into Japanese for its theatrical release. This film actually was specifically designed to be shown before the screenings of the 1933 American King Kong film. It was not a kaiju film by any stretch of the imagination. And actually, probably the most interesting thing I think about this film is that it's believed to be lost forever because it was destroyed in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. And then you have the second of these films, these Kong Lost films, which is the 1938 King Kong appears in Edo. And it's got a bit more uncertainty swirling around it. The movie definitely isn't about the King Kong that we know as a giant ape from Skull Island just appearing in feudal Japan and wreaking havoc. Rather, it's the name of a pet ape of the film's main antagonist who kidnaps the daughter of a feudal lord. There's some publicity stills, and they've shown this Kong as both giant and human-sized, which is kind of adding to some of the confusion. And the suit actor, he actually once used the word giant to describe the ape. But that could easily just be a reference to the size of an ape as being able to kill a human. So, though not certain, it's pretty unlikely that this was a true kaiju film. And again, unfortunately, like the previous film, was actually forever lost due to the bombing of Hiroshima.
Interesting. Yeah. And for even more on those movies and a whole bunch of other King Kong movies, some made, some unmade, some concepts of ones that eventually wound up being made and where those concepts permutated from, you can refer to the book Kong Unmade, The Lost Films of Skull Island by John LeMay. That actually has input, Matt, from your co-host at Kaiju Transmissions, Kyle Bird. But yeah, with all that cleared up, really the most important piece to take away from all of this is that Kong is wildly popular worldwide and in Japan in particular, and this inspires a great many Japanese content creators. Take, for instance, just offhand, Donkey Kong. That's named Donkey Kong, due to, like, they said he was stubborn like a donkey, but then the Kong part of it is his resemblance to King Kong. So this inspiration of King Kong, like we said, and we'll probably say again and again, he watches movies and TV while he works. It extends to Toriyama as well.
Now, originally, Toriyama called this ape form Kaibutsuzaru, which just means ape monster. And he used Kaibutsu rather than Kaiju to denote that there's a difference between this monster and the giant monster from monster movies. Though Kaibutsuzaru is a giant, to be sure, it's not meant to be like a city smashing giant like Godzilla. So it's like not quite the same scale. It's later that he coins the term Oozaru, and he sticks with that moving forward, kind of as we've seen before. He forgets what he names things, or he changes his mind as time goes on. The O in front of a word in Japanese usually means great or large, and is also a homonym for king. So it's another way to play on words for Toriyama, denoting it as large ape or like king of the apes.
Yeah, and it's also an a common naming convention for unnamed kaiju that appear in media. So, like, specifically the Godzilla franchise. One particular example would be the Odaku, which is from the King Kong versus Godzilla film. Daku meaning octopus in Japanese. So there's some blurring of the lines between the Oozaru and traditional kaiju. And then furthermore, in the show Ultra Q, which, by the way, I can't recommend that show enough if you ever want to check out something Ultraman related. Ultra Q is a great place to start.
That's two recommendations.
You need to. It's magnificent,
and it's cheap.
It's like what, $10.
It was like $11 for Ultra Q and like $9 for Neo Ultra Q.
Yeah, they're both wonderful. But the second episode of Ultra Q features a pet monkey who winds up growing huge, and Eiji Tsuburaya reused the Kong suit from King Kong versus Godzilla, but he actually added big ears and a tail. And at one point in the episode, it is referred to as Oozaru.
Right. So you can see when you start stacking these things on top of each other, it's pretty clear where Toriyama's drawing his influences from, with the big ears and the tail and the more human stature. And, we've shown over and over how influenced by TV and movies he is, whether unconsciously or consciously, and whether he admits it or not. And speaking of admitting things, Toriyama openly admits he wanted a transformation in his manga. And he says he originally intended for the transformation to be more human-sized and similar to a Wolfman, because he's a big fan of the 1941 Universal Studios Wolfman movie, which, so am I. There's another one. There's another one I can't recommend highly enough if you, for some reason, you've never checked it out. But however, when Toriyama kind of realizes the situation he's put our characters in, and he needs the transformation to be bigger to get them out of their jam, he utilizes causing the full moon to cause the transformation to retain that homage to the Wolfman. So even the kanji that Toriyama chooses to use for full moon, those are more traditional, and they actually specifically denote a reflection of the moon in one's eyes. So there's where you kind of get your whole Toriyama blending this tradition of Sun Wukong with the more modern Kong, and obviously the even more modern than Kong, Ultra Q, as well as this Western monster movie in this fusion of cultures, and he creates something new with it.
Additionally, with regards to the moon aspect, the use of the moon as a counteragent to Pilaf's plan to bake our heroes in the sun is sort of like a yin-yang opposition. In kanji, the symbols for yin and yang even contain the symbols for moon and sun, respectively, so it's likely that Toriyama's aware of this yin-yang aspect, and he's playing on it by having the murderous, rage-fueled Oozaru of yin energy burst forth from the innocent, kind, observable yang of Goku. The Oozaru, being unknown to Goku, is part of an ancient Chinese belief that within each Shishen, or knowing self, there exists potentially several Fu Yuanshen, or assistant spirit selves, that can assist or influence the conscious self in difficult times or just in general as a sleepwalker. Kind of like calling on your ancestors type thing, if you will. So while these assistant spirits are fully aware of the knowing self, it is only those with highly adapted skills and intense training who can consciously tap into and communicate with their Fu Yuan Shen.
Yeah, and that'll kind of interestingly come into play much, much later when we get into Z and talking more about Vegeta, I think. But as for why the tail needs to be cut off to end the transformation, that's pretty simple. Toriyama just hated drawing it, and he's notoriously kind of lazy, and so he even said he was just trying to think of a way from the outset and a reason to get rid of the tail almost as soon as he started working on Dragon Ball, and he was like, this will be a good opportunity, and he has the tail just get cut off. Obviously,
love how there's a running theme in this show or in this manga of like the creator just being like, I don't want to do that. That's too much work.
That's where a lot of transformations end up coming from too.
I don't want to explain how they get that strong. We'll just make it a transformation. It's fine.
Yeah, and I mean the whole reason Super Saiyan looks the way it does is because Toriyama got tired of coloring in Goku's hair. So
that's perfect. I love it.
But yeah, let's just talk about this form a little bit more. I mean, it's hard now to separate it from what we know about Goku as a Saiyan and an alien, and this being intrinsically tied to his race. For me, it was always linked to that alien nature. Like, I never thought of it as more of a mystical thing like it is during its initial appearance. I totally get it now, and I think it works just as well either way. I don't know about you guys, but like, just me, for instance, like, when you're watching this show, very often throughout, especially in the very early goings, and this is kind of one of those things where it's almost better that it gets dropped maybe after the second or third episode. I forget when it is, but like very early on, Bulma like makes a big to-do about the tail, and then she even is shocked when Goku can kind of use it, like it's prehensile. And then that whole element to his character gets dropped, and I feel like you mostly forget about it except for the one point where Chi-Chi grabs his tail and it makes him weak. It kind of then works then. It makes it feel like it was really well set up. That, there's something weird about this kid. He's not 100% just a normal human being. So it works on that mystical level, but for me it's hard to separate it from the alien nature.
I had the exact same experience because you always tie it back to, well, the Saiyans can transform and they use this as a way to conquer planets, which is what kind of the intent is in Z. And then when you watch it in this, and like, you would never have that inclination other than Goku just isn't fully human. But I agree with you, like, it does work both ways. And I actually think I've watched Dragon Ball in a very long time, but I actually rewatched the first 13 episodes in preparation for coming on tonight. They set it up really well. They set the story up for him and the relation to what happens to his grandfather, but you never kind of piece together anything until this episode. I think the story is told in a way that, like, it's believable, it's a lot of fun, and also, like, they don't make a big deal of the tail, but also, like, Dragon Ball has a bunch of weird talking animals too, so, like, it doesn't really throw you for a loop the way that it could maybe in other shows.
Same as you guys. I think it works both ways, but I wouldn't mind talking to somebody who was introduced this through Dragon Ball first, like, and going through the whole thing chronologically as to like how it hit them when it's revealed in Z that he's an alien, because it would just hit differently for somebody who was introduced to Goku when he was still a kid.
It is weird, right? I mean, it's definitely that's the big reason why there's a delineation between Dragon Ball and Z. It's not the age difference of Goku, because towards the end of Dragon Ball, you get a fairly significant time jump, and you get Goku as I don't want to say full adult yet, but he's in his very early adulthood, right? When you get the final tournament arc that's in Dragon Ball, but that is still Dragon Ball. That's not, we don't consider that time jump to be part of a different show. And I think really the the key difference is Dragon Ball is more mystical and more, these things are happening because of traditions and because of Japanese and Chinese traditions. And it's all springing forth from this journey to the West. Whereas Z then gives some of these things more practical explanations. Matt and I are both tied into the kaiju world a little bit. When people always want like an explanation for how King Kong got so big or something, it's sort of like Toriyama's giving that answer, but at least he's doing some fun and interesting things with it.
Yeah, there's a group of like, I'm just going to call it like kind of idiotic fans, and they're always upset. Like, well, how did Kong grow from 100 feet tall to 400 feet or whatever he is in the next movie? And it's like, I don't think that question is actually worth asking, let alone answering. But you're right, Tom. That's exactly what that is.
Don't question it. Just enjoy the movie.
So I'm going to ask Matt a question, and it's going to blow his brains, but I'm going to try to qualify the question afterwards and maybe make it not as, triggering for him. Matt, is Oozaru a kaiju? And
I'm triggered.
And I think what I really kind of mean by that is do you agree? I mean, can you see those influences in this form? Not even. I mean, feel free to use other appearances of it as well. But can you see the appearance, the influences of Kong and that episode of Ultra Q? I forget what the monkey's actual name in it.
Is it Goro or Godo or something? I think it's Goro.
Golgo or something like that. Yeah. It starts with a G. We know that. For $11, you could find out at home. Man, Mill Creek needs to give me a job. But
I really do.
No, I mean, you think that stuff kind of shows its face in this?
I do. Yeah, like it's not. I'm trying to think of how to answer this without like going on a kaiju tangent here.
That's why I brought you on, though.
Yeah, I know. But like, there's this whole thing on Twitter where somebody was like, "Hey, is Clifford the big red dog a kaiju?" And like all they're saying is, well, he's a big dog, and if the monster is big, they must then also be a kaiju. Like that's their very loose definition of what a kaiju is. But like, kaiju is supposed to be more of like strange beast, and then you add the giant component later on, and it becomes daikaiju. I would say that the influences of Kong, the size of the beast, the fact that like later on they actually give him like this beam that he can shoot from his mouth. Yeah, it's absolutely a kaiju. But like, is that a hill that I want to die on? No, it's not. But like, I think the answer would be yeah. And like the influences of Kong are there. They're obvious, and like they're intentional. And then you have him he's as big as a castle. He's ripping things apart. And then later in Z, you have like Gohan destroying everything in front of Piccolo. You find out that the Saiyans are actually using this form as a way to conquer planets because they go into these unstoppable rage fests and they start shooting this beam that like basically creates atomic bomb explosions. So like they're definitely monsters and they're definitely kaiju, but like I don't know that I'd argue with somebody over it if they thought differently.
Right. Yeah. And that's
because they'd obviously be wrong, right?
I think you can see the influences of it throughout too, right? This isn't one of those things where the first time we see it, it's this very like kaiju, it's destroying a city type of thing. And then the next times we see it, it's granted the next couple times we see it, it's not destroying cities. It's in like just barren, rocky wastelands. Actually, one exception. Because the very next time we see it actually is at a world martial arts tournament. But even there, it's not like destroying cities. So where it kind of comes into play more in these later episodes is when the Oozaru is interacting with people and, crushing them and stepping on them and things like that, which are all things that you could see in Kong specifically in like the 1933 original is really the only one that has like an extended sequence where Kong runs amok in the village. Not just in New York City, but in the village when he first breaks out of the gate on Skull Island. And, he's kind of stamping the dude into the muck and all that kind of stuff. I mean, those images are somewhat similar. So, yeah, no. So, one other thing that's happened is, right, we see this pop up, this transformation, spoiler alert, pops up again in the very near future, like somewhere in the next 20 or 30 episodes for sure. And then it does pop up again later in Z when Vegeta uses it and Gohan gets accidentally triggered before. But since then, in Dragon Ball canon, it has been largely forgotten about. I don't know, does that bother you guys at all? Do you feel like it's been forgotten, ignored, disrespected? Would you like to see it come back? I mean, any thoughts on that?
I'm a little disappointed that the only time they ever tried to do anything with it was in GT with the Super Saiyan 4 transformation, which was just
It's a pretty neat idea though. I like that idea at its core in GT. I don't know about you guys, but like the idea that like cutting off your tail does limit your full potential.
I do like that idea, and I do like the idea in GT. I don't love GT as a whole, but like they actually took something that had basically been forgotten about, and they tried to bring it to the forefront. And I think like there were a lot of stories that they could have told using the Oozaru. Like there's just a bunch of stuff you could have done with it, and I don't know if it was just like not interesting, because honestly, the fight between Goku and Vegeta in the Great Ape form is actually pretty fun to watch. And you have this, like the Bardock movie has some of it as well. So like there's some stuff they could have done. Would you sit down and watch a movie with a bunch of Saiyans conquering a planet and transforming? Like, of course you would. I think there's things that were left on the table, but I also understand like Z, the focus is going to be on the smaller, the humanoid sized characters and them fighting. But I think they left a lot of potential stories on the table by basically just throwing this away and forgetting about it.
I think I would have really, really liked to have seen two Oozarus fight each other.
Now you're talking Matt's language.
I think that would have been interesting. Or another example would be like Lord Slug, how he makes himself gigantic. It would be interesting if they countered that with one of the Saiyans using their Oozaru form to fight him. I think that would be pretty cool too.
That would have been fun. Yeah, that would have been pretty sweet.
Yeah, massive spoiler alert, because I don't know if either of you have kept up at all with where the manga is as of right now, and I won't even talk about where it is as of right now while we're recording, but beyond the end of the Super anime, there's a character named Moro, and I only know like little bits and pieces because I plan on reading the manga and stuff as we're going through this show. So now I'm like, oh, that's something for me to look forward to, So I only know what I know from what I've seen of little things, but he, I guess, becomes... does he become gigantic, or he becomes part of a planet or something to that effect? And like, that would be a perfect opportunity to bring this form back in some way, but they don't do that.
Have either of you kept up with Heroes at all? Dragon Ball Heroes?
No.
Nope.
So it does come back sort of in that. But like, I guess Dragon Ball Z extended multiverse thing or whatever, because they're just bringing in like different timelines of these Dragon Ball characters. And listen, there's no plot. It's just people show up and fight, but it's fun to watch if you have a few minutes. And it's like every episode is maybe 10, 12 minutes long. So it's also pretty short. Definitely worth checking out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the show's existence. I know it's not considered canon for whatever canon means, I mean, that's like a whole other kind of discussion even. Because even within canon there can be your own interpretations of it and the extent to which any of it...
There's a billion timelines in Dragon Ball.
And the extent to which any of it actually matters at the end of the day really is up to you. I mean, think about like what is canon and how many people have never experienced. Like, there's so many people who have never experienced the Dragon Ball portion of Dragon Ball.
They're missing out.
Oh, I know for sure. But yeah, I mean, that's like it's not at all uncommon. I mean, for probably the first like 10 years I was into the franchise, I had only seen Z and possibly GT. Like, I never had seen the original. For however much canon matters, it really, like, you can pick and choose your own canon in something as vast and sprawling as the world of Dragon Ball. But yeah, no, I just have never, again, that's kind of another one of those things. I've never checked out Heroes, but that's like another avenue for us to explore eventually on this show.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's what makes this show so great, so we can go anywhere.
So would you say the consensus here is that the Oozaru is the vestigial tale of Dragon Ball that gets cut off and forgotten about?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
It is, and you know, this is another one of those things where we could have a much longer discussion, and I kind of don't know how much I want to, but like, because we could even have this whole discussion another time of power levels and power multipliers and things like that, because God, in Dragon Ball it has been so much more. And this is even just my understanding, right? I'm not even 100% sure what all the power levels are, but my understanding is that it has been like fairly outlined along the way. Like, this person's power level at this point is 600, and at this point it's 6 million, and then it's 6 billion, and then it's 6 decadode triple gajillion, you know, like when you get to the one of the reasons I guess you could argue that this form has been forgotten is that it's a 10x multiplier to your strength, which, like, okay, Goku can Kaioken times 20, you know, like a 10x.
Yeah, but giant red monkey, though, that would be awesome.
I'd watch. Yeah, again, like.
Yes, and that's I do think there's a place for it, and it's just been forgotten. And I don't know if it's been forgotten. I'm not sure why, you know, because it's something. If this was something that was only in Dragon Ball and not in Z, I could very much say, oh, it's because it's in that more mystical part of the show, and then it was just dumped. But one of this franchise's most popular characters has one of his most iconic early moments in this, or, you know, some of his most iconic early moments in this form, and it's never seen again. So I'm not sure why it's been dropped, because there are opportunities, I think, to bring it back in some form.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd like to see it come back. I think it'd be awesome.
And I don't know if it's because the show just is kind of, I don't want to say devolved. That's such a nasty word to use, but shifted its focus more to being a more interpersonal, battle-driven thing. You know, because one of the things Dragon Ball, and I keep saying we're going to talk about this another time, but we will talk about this another time. One of the things Dragon Ball really revolutionized and kind of perfected too in manga and storytelling and anime is fighting and the interpersonal fight. And these fights are, yet the fights themselves are glorious and gorgeous, especially in the anime. A lot of times there's just some fights where the animation and everything is just beautiful to look at and so much fun and so entertaining. And that's always an entertaining thing, right? That's why, like, kung fu films are so popular, is because, like, watching two people duke it out and test their abilities against each other, even in an animated form, is just really entertaining. And so maybe the show's become more focused on that piece of it and less focused on monsters, really. You know, it's become more focused on the stories you can tell. But I still think you could tell stories of an interpersonal nature through kaiju media. And that's, I mean, Matt,
I mean, there's plenty of movies out there that show that that's possible.
yeah, and I think Matt's going to agree with me on this, a couple of these that I'm about to list off, and maybe he's got some others, but like, you know, even recent movies like Colossal or a recent show like Godzilla Singular Point show that you can have something that's got kaiju in it, and lots of kaiju in it even at times, but tells a personal story.
Yeah, I mean, in Monster Zero, which is one of my favorite Godzilla films, you have these characters that are very much at the forefront, with the monsters kind of in the background, and the monsters are dictating where the story goes. But it's not till the end of the film that the monsters really come out and shine. But by the time that you get there, your characters have been so established in this it's a very personal story, and it's about, like, I'm trying to not give a plot synopsis here, but the way it plays out is very personal, heartfelt, meaningful with these characters. And when the monsters show up, the stakes have been raised because now you care about the people in front of you, versus some what you consider like B-movie monsters where you don't care about what's on screen. You just want to see monsters kill things. Monster Zero is the opposite of that. You care about the people. Like, you're there to see the people first. And that's not something you can say about every monster movie, but it's those kinds of stories that if you adapt into like Dragon Ball or even like Dragon Ball Z, you could do a lot of really awesome stuff with.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the reasons that potentially, arguably, the most popular usage of this form is when Vegeta uses it, is because A, he's more antagonistic, but B, he's more aware of himself when he's in his Oozaru form, and so you get a very personal story that's going on within it. I mean, yes, the Oozaru in its initial appearance is just it's this crazy WTF moment. You know, like, God, I really wish, like Bekinney said, I really wish you could go back and experience this without knowing that's coming for the first time, because it's a huge WTF. It comes out of nowhere. It's a major left turn and a major curveball. And not only that, but it doesn't just solely rely on the twist, because there's also that deeper layer to it, right, of learning something about Goku and learning something tragic about his past. You know, he is the one who unknowingly killed his own grandfather. That, I think, the reason I even forgot about briefly it appearing in the Budokai Tenkaichi, or whatever it's called, the World Martial Arts Tournament, is that has a less personal driven focus to it, right? It's just a kind of fun actiony moment. And then later you get, the thing with Vegeta. I think you could very easily bring it back again and have it hit that more personal level. And that's really the roots of the kaiju genre as a whole too, because, I mean, yes, King Kong is the granddaddy of them all and everything, but the genre really becomes a genre with the Godzilla franchise. You know, before that, you've got your outliers. You got your King Kong, The Lost World. There's a few others. But the roots of this go back to Godzilla. And even in, probably the first 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 kaiju movies in general that Toho makes, they're all very human-driven stories.
And to kind of expand on your thought here about like having those sort of interpersonal moments, sort of punctuate what's going on with this monster. We also do kind of have that in this episode, where we've got Pilaf working with his underlings instead of like constantly berating them to try and escape the castle and defend it against this giant ape. You've got Yamcha momentarily getting over his fear of women to help Bulma escape danger. You've got Oolong putting someone else's well-being before his own by also trying to help Bulma escape. You have Bulma being a little bit more proactive in looking after herself, as opposed to trying to get somebody else to do what needs to be done all the time. And I think it ties in really well with that theme that you guys are talking about of having these more personal level stories with this giant monster rampaging as a backdrop.
Yeah. And I wonder, this is like almost like a chicken or an egg type of thing. Did Toriyama kind of lose interest in kaiju movies, and so he just kind of lost interest in bringing this form back and using it to tell these stories? Or did the idea of what a kaiju movie is, because it really, like, if you talk to most people, even people who claim to be fans of the genre, they'll say, I'm just here to see the monsters fight. And that's not at all a dissimilar thing from what you hear in Dragon Ball a lot of times, you know, like, I'm just here for the fights. Like, did he lose interest in the genre because he just kind of lost interest in it and so it just kind of faded away? Or did he become so aware of it being all about the fights and losing its focus on the human element of it that it just, that kind of influenced him? Like, I don't like where that genre's going anymore, and if I have to bring that into my art, then I have to bring those tropes in, and I don't want to. It's kind of an interesting question and thought.
It's tough to say, and given Toriyama's behavior, we'll probably never know.
I was going to say, you kind of get the sort of the inverse, right, with the Saiyans attacking the planet Arlia, where Nappa fights the giant grasshopper thing. So in that particular little story, which I think might be a filler episode, I'm not actually sure, but you have the giant creature of Arlia defending the planet, and he actually fights Nappa, and he gets obliterated. But that's actually kind of a cool little moment, which shows me, like, you could have done that in a meaningful way with characters that we care about. You could have continued the tradition of, like, I think you're right. Probably the most memorable appearance of the Oozaru is actually Vegeta's appearance, because he's self-aware. He actually can speak. He's like insulting Goku as he's, you know, basically torturing him and things. But, like, imagine that story retold from, again, like, planet being dominated by Saiyans and the people having to cope with it. Or, like, maybe it's the inverse, where a Saiyan gets left behind on a planet, decides not to destroy it, and then becomes an Oozaru to save them from a different conquering alien force or something. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff you could do with it.
Yeah, that's one thing. I think the most interesting potential future for this, if they ever brought it back, would be to have I would say Goku, most likely. I mean, he's Goku. To have him turn into the Oozaru and have to learn how to, like, Vegeta has to somehow reach him in his mind to be able to get him to use it. And then you could also tell a story about it being a complete force for good, right? Because we've only ever seen it. Yep. We've only ever seen it as an antagonistic force in Dragon Ball.
True.
Yeah.
And so it'd be an interesting inversion, which I'm surprised a little bit then that Toriyama never brought it back, because he loves inverting things, right? He loves, like, subverting expectations and things, and to have him end up bringing it back later and everyone thinks it's going to be like this, like, rampaging wild beast, and to have it be like a protector would be a really interesting play and inversion, but it just hasn't happened yet. Maybe it'll come back eventually, and like Matt said, it even has kind of appeared again in Dragon Ball Heroes. So, you know, there's potential, and there's never no hope with a franchise as long running and gigantic as this.
Well, plus you have the Saiyans from other universes now, so, like, they could have benevolent Oozarus for all we know.
Right. I think that's it. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
I do have one small thing I wanted to bring up. Has absolutely nothing to do with kaiju.
Okay.
I thought it was adorable. I thought it was adorable that Pilaf shares a bedroom with Mai and Shu.
I did watch that. I was like, oh, that's an interesting choice. It made me chuckle.
Because he's got this huge castle.
Yeah, and he shares his bedroom with two other people. It's great.
Yeah, it is a good, like, it's a good episode, and that's a, you know, I mentioned this is a good, I think I mentioned it last episode, like, this is a very good final episode for a season 1 or arc 1 or whatever, because it does leave things open for a sequel for sure, but if we never saw these characters again after this point, that would also be okay. Like, the arc and everything, their stories are very kind of completed at this point. And I know people who know all the adventures that we've gone on since, and all the growth and drastic increases in power level that Goku still has yet to do are going to be like, what? He's going off to train. That's such a tease. But like, it really, like, when we talk about, as we've been for the last several episodes of this show, talking about Goku is, as a character, he's the flat character. He knows his truth already. He doesn't have anything really to learn left about himself. And all the characters that he has interacted with in this first arc, their stories are, at least for what they've built up to this point, completed. Yeah, with that said, thanks, Matt, for joining us. I don't know, do you got a plug or a something you wanna throw in?
Yeah, actually. So you can find our show Kaiju Transmissions. We are on Facebook. We have our Twitter account, which is KT_podcast. And then we also have, and I don't know when this episode is going to drop, but we have Kaiju Masterclass that we're part of. We're actually putting on a online convention with several Japanese actors, directors, and that's going to be online through YouTube, and that's Kaiju Masterclass.
Yeah, and I'll chime in here and say that this will probably not air before that goes live. But whether you're coming to this before or after Kaiju Masterclass goes live, those interviews and those things will be on YouTube forever, or at least until YouTube takes them down or something, or until the heat death of the universe. So, you know, you can go back and watch any of them. And, you know, just speaking from, you know, past experience, there's been some really good, if you're interested in this stuff at all, some extremely good interviews with some of the filmmakers of Godzilla and Gamera movies, people involved with the Ultraman series. There's been the one of the interviews, because this is not the first, Matt's talking about, this is not the first Kaiju Masterclass that has happened. So, you know, you can go back and watch the old ones too. There's an interview with Bear McCreary, who did the score on the Godzilla King of the Monsters movie. So there's a lot of very varied takes from different content creators who are officially or semi-officially involved with this kaiju genre as a whole. So feel free to just go over to YouTube and search for Kaiju Masterclass and peruse at your leisure, because there's some really cool stuff in there.
And again, you can check out the podcast as well, Kaiju Transmissions. We will talk all kinds of craziness, giant monsters, and it's a lot of fun. And you get to hear Jelly's self come on and join us from time to time. So,
yes, I'm a mainstay in October there.
that is. You do. You set up residence in October every single year.
But yep, thanks for joining us, Matt. We'll let you get going now.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I've been meaning to ask you. Earlier, you said, "Oh my roots." What was that about? Your people part plant or something?
More on the or something side, but sure. It's just a common exclamation of surprise.
Well, my breath is fully caught. How about yours?
I guess, but aren't those things still outside?
It doesn't sound like it. Why don't I push this rock out of the way and you take a peek?
Oh man, do I have to?
We could venture into this cave instead.
What was that noise?
Which mystery would you rather solve? Whether the crickets are out there or whatever is back in there?
Pass?
Just get out there and take a look.
Okay, but if I get killed, I'm not gonna be happy.
Neither will I guess. Now quit stalling.
Okay, well, let me just take a minute.
Nope!
Oh, you son of a... Hey, everything actually looks okay out here.
You sure?
Yeah. Wait. Ah!
Bekinney? Bekinney? Well, listeners, I guess I'll take my leave of you here. I probably shouldn't have simulated that roar and forced Bekinney to go outside, but I thought it'd be faster to take the direct route than fumbling around in this cave. Will Bekinney manage to escape the giant crickets bearing down on him? Will I find my way through this cave back to my ship? Will you be able to reach your final form? Find out next time and help us achieve our final form.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bekinney? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.